Welcome in the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. Always good to get into another division. AFC West is one that's on the Titans' schedule this year. We, of course, know that they'll open with the Denver Broncos. First time in a long time, Greg. First time that they've traveled to Vegas. The last time they played on the road against the Raiders, they were still in Oakland. And to get the Chiefs and Chargers at home, no small challenge there. It's a really fun division, always hugely competitive, and Denver is a
Yeah,
really interesting place to start. You and I have gotten into this a little bit when the schedule got out,
yeah.
but every time I look at their defense, Greg, it's tough for me to not be just generally impressed. They're well coached. They've got great personnel. They obviously led the league in sacks last year, and they've got the reigning defensive player of the year. It's tough to say a bad thing about Denver's defense.
No, and you know what? I'm kind of glad, Buck, that you started with their defense because obviously everybody immediately thinks Sean Payton, Bo Nix. But they led the NFL in sacks a year ago. They're a really good defense with a lot of really interesting personnel. Maybe players that are not well known nationally, but very like Nick Benito. It's funny. I remember doing him coming out of Oklahoma. He came out in 2022. And I really loved him as a pass rusher. And he was a little light, and I knew it would take a little time, but he just had that bend, that flexibility, that suddenness, that explosiveness. And then all of a sudden, in his third year, this past year, he really becomes a dominant player. And along with Jonathan Cooper, another really good player who was a seventh round pick, by the way. So, they've become a really good defense. Vance Joseph has been in the league a long time. It'll be we'll do a lot more of this when we get close to the season, but this will be a fascinating test for this sort of new Titans offense, obviously with Cam Ward and a totally revamped O line, because this is a really good group and they're very good in the secondary as well.
Yeah, I mean the secondary, the rich get richer in this particular situation with the first round pick there coming in Jahdae Barron out of Texas, and
Yeah.
obviously with everything that they've got up front, I wonder, Greg, how you view the role that they have for Surtain. We think that Jahdae Barron is going to be their starting nickel, right? Their starting slot.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, I would think because I think Riley Moss will stay on the outside. He was a little up and down last year, but I think he'll be a good player. We know about Sertan. They brought in Hufanga from the 49ers. And another player who I've always really liked, and he played really well for them is Brandon Jones. He's the other safety. He'll be the other safety with Hufanga. Um, they're really good on the back end. And Jahdae Barron, he's kind of an attitude swagger player, and I felt like the slot was his going to be his best role in the league, and he was drafted, in my view, to be their slot corner.
Yeah, they lose Cody Barton to the Titans, but they replace him with Dre Greenlaw, who's been a good player, just has had some injuries in
Yeah.
his career coming in here. I guess from a deployment standpoint, Greg, and what you know that Vance Joseph likes to do based on the coaching tree that he comes from. This is a complicated defense to play, and I wonder what
Yes.
are some hallmarks for the audience who's going to be, especially here in Nashville, paying close attention to the Broncos as we get closer and closer. We're really not that far away from week one at this point.
No, and we'll get in more into that when we're, leading up to the season. But Vance Joseph is very good with pressure schemes. So that's something that'll be a really big deal for an O line that obviously has much better players for Tennessee. But until you really work together in games, that it's different. And every coach will tell you that. I mean, they finish the offseason program, they'll go through training camp. We know Bill Callahan will be working really hard to get them prepared. He's been in the league a long time. He knows Vance Joseph really well, but still, they put tremendous stress on you mentally. That's the key thing. The Titans will be better physically on the O line, but it's mentally when you play a team like the Broncos week one. That's a homework game, Buck. That's a game where you really have to study all their pressure concepts, everything they do out of base. What do they do out of nickel? What do they do out of dime? That's where it really comes down. And one player we didn't mention who's a great player, but probably, again, not as well known nationally as many, is Zach Allen. He's a defensive lineman who plays multiple spots along their defensive front, depending on personnel on the field. But, as I said, this is a homework game. You really have to study and understand what you're seeing before the ball snapped.
I can't wait to actually get into that matchup before week one, which of course we'll wait a little longer to preview. But just on the offensive side of the ball, Bo Nix specifically, Greg, the fit
Yeah.
with Sean Payton. What did you like about the things that Payton
Yeah.
did with Bo Nix, and what did Bo Nix show you that maybe you thought he was capable of on tape coming out of college, or maybe surprised you at a certain point?
Well, I'll tell you the one thing that surprised me. I'll get to that in a sec. But as you probably remember, when I did Bo Nix a year ago, I thought that with Sean Payton would be the perfect fit for him. And I said that obviously before the draft because I just thought Nix was a kind of a very rhythmic player, didn't necessarily show a gun in college, but I loved his movement. I loved the way he just played rhythmically. He executed his college offense at a really high level. And I thought the way Sean Payton plays offense, that would fit well. The thing that he really showed last year, which surprised me a little bit, is he showed a much better arm than I thought. And people have to understand what arm strength is in the NFL. Arm strength is not being able, Buck, to throw the ball 70 yards, in the air. That's not what arm strength is in the NFL. Arm strength in the NFL is more a function of let's say throwing a deep dig, an inbreaker at 22 to 25 yards in between zone defenders, in those tight throwing windows where you have to really drive the football, with timing, with anticipation and velocity. That's arm strength in the NFL. And Bo Nix showed that. And I wasn't certain he, really had that kind of arm coming out of college, but he made those kinds of throws on a weekly basis. And it was kind of fun to watch because I did get to know Bo Nix a little bit, and he's a great kid.
Yeah, there was a really good conversation that you and forgive me, I'm forgetting the name of your
Doug Farrar,
co-host.
Doug Farrar and I, yeah, did a
Doug
great thing
Farrar
with,
had a
yeah,
really
yeah.
good conversation. I'm pretty sure that's still available on YouTube. You could probably find it on social
Yeah,
media.
that was a lot of fun. And the thing that also made me realize, and that was done after I finished my evaluation of Bo Nix on tape, but that made me realize that he'd make it in the league because he was responsible for all the protections at Oregon. And that's very, very rare for a college quarterback. So for him to have that experience, and I'm sure Sean Payton, he's obviously a little smarter than I am, Sean Payton, but I'm sure he felt the same way that, hey, if this kid understands protections and how to call them at the college level, he's three steps ahead already.
Yeah, it's a fun week one matchup for Tennessee. I'm looking forward to it. We can't spend all the time on the Broncos though, because uh,
We'll
the
get to
uh,
that.
the Super Bowl runner-up, the Kansas City Chiefs, are also in this division. And Greg, this is a fascinating offseason for them as they survived throughout the course of the season. They did better than survive, right? They have been
Sure.
battle tested in a lot of these different situations. They've got knowledgeable coaches on both sides of the ball. Just the personnel, it felt like, wasn't what the Eagles had opposite them, and they pretty well got swamped on offense, given what the Eagles pass rush was able to do. So they draft Josh Simmons in the first round. They also add Jalen Royals to that skill group, Greg. And
Yeah.
I know we've talked a lot about the way that the Chiefs have changed the way that they play offense, how much more refined at the position Patrick Mahomes has had. But I guess when you look at the additions, how much better do you think this Chiefs offense can be?
Well, the number one thing is they're hoping Josh Simmons can be their starting left tackle. That obviously they had to make that change and put Joe Tooney at left tackle, and play Endo at left guard, and that became a weakness. I mean, Tooney did as well as he could. Obviously, in the Super Bowl, he was exposed, as was Endo. So they're hoping that Simmons can step right in as a starter. That's an unknown, but I thought Simmons and the Oregon left tackle, Connolly, Josh Connolly. I thought they were the two most athletic tackles in the draft class, which doesn't mean they'll automatically be great players, but that's what they're hoping. They're hoping that they can bring Kingsley Suamatea, who was a tackle in college, that he can play left guard. And that's the hope. I mean, the left side of the line was an issue going down the stretch, and they were able to sort of circumvent it because the quarterback's obviously great. And the wide receiver group, it's funny that they drafted Jalen Royals because in some ways I thought his tape reminded me of Rashid Rice, who's
Mm.
going to be back this year. So they've got a lot of receivers. They were not a vertical passing team very much at all last year. And I would think that's something they'll spend a lot of time through the offseason, through training camp, becoming a little bit more of a vertical team. Because obviously Patrick Mahomes can make those throws. But even someone like Xavier Worthy, I mean, he had very few 20 plus yard receptions a year ago. And you're drafting him because that's what he can do. I mean, the guy's a vertical dimension. So we'll see what their offense looks like.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that they've become they don't seem to have as many, and I could pull the numbers up when this game gets closer so we could talk about it. Just the level of explosive plays
Oh,
that
you're
they've been
right.
generating in the last couple of years, and I imagine, Greg, that's also a great deal to do with the way that defenses are playing and adjusting to them. Because I'm sure you've noticed on tape when you break down Chiefs games on the matchup show the way the defenses are adjusting.
Yeah, and the other thing too is and this is not necessarily a rip on Patrick Mahomes. It's just the nature of what their offense became. Mahomes had one of the lowest completion percentages in the league on passes 20 plus yards in the air from the line of scrimmage. For instance, Sam Darnold had 56% completion percentage
That's
on
crazy.
passes thrown 20 plus yards in the air from the line of scrimmage. Patrick Mahomes was 26%, among the lowest and worst in the league. Now, that's like I said, we know Mahomes is great. That's not a knock on Patrick Mahomes. I think that's just the way their whole offense sort of played out as the year progressed.
Yeah. On the defensive side of the ball, they have a lot of additions for Steve
Yeah,
Spagnuolo, whether it be Omar Noman-Lott, who they drafted in the second round to kind of fortify that defensive line group. They also have Christian Fulton, who Titans fans are familiar
yeah.
with. He's expected to start on the outside opposite Jalen Watson, I would assume at this point. They also added Noel Williams to that secondary. Greg, the way that Steve Spagnuolo is a known commodity in the NFL. But as far as the personnel changes go, what kind of intrigues you about this group?
Yeah, I think the secondary is the key factor here. Just because Fulton's there now, you mentioned they drafted Noah Williams, whose tape I liked out of Cal, but they're unknowns in his system. He wants to play press. Steve Spagnuolo plays as much press as any D coordinator in the league because that's what he believes in, and he also believes that's the way the league has gone with so much of a short passing game, a timing rhythm-based passing games, RPOs. You can't impact the quarterback. The ball's out too quick. So what do you have to do, Buck? You've got to impact receivers. You've got to be able to press them. You got to get up in their face and disrupt receivers. We know Trent McDuffie, who's played both outside and inside. We'll see how Fulton works out. Fulton was originally, as you well know, you know him. He was a second round pick. It's not as if he wasn't thought of as a good player, but now this is his third team. His third team in only what, 5 years or so, something like that. So he has something to prove himself. So even though they signed him and they're penciling him right now to be a starter opposite Watson, that remains a little bit of an unknown. So we'll see because McDuffie certainly can go back outside because they have played other players in the slot. They did that through last season. They played Chamari Connor in the slot. They played Roland Wallace in the slot. So they have some options if it doesn't work. But in an ideal world, they would like Fulton to be the corner opposite Watson.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about players who have potential but may not realize their potential all the time in the NFL. Christian Fulton has moments, and he's still been a high level player at points in his career. But
Without question.
as you've mentioned, he's definitely bounced around at this point. I don't know if that's specific to the soft tissue injuries, which were always a problem for him here, but certainly availability is something that he's struggled with. I don't know that there's a more interesting offense before we get to actually see them, Greg, than Vegas. With Chip Kelly coming back to the
Yeah.
NFL and just the personnel that they have assembled at this point in time. I don't think it's a bad thing that I just don't know what to make of them, but I don't know that I'm more intrigued by what a coach is going to do with a specific group of players than what the Vegas Raiders currently have on the roster.
Well, and I think the number one thing to understand is Chip Kelly, contrary to what many might believe, because for people that sort of lost track of him a little bit, I mean, obviously now they knew that he was at Ohio State last year, but they probably lost track of him a little bit from when he was with the Eagles. Chip Kelly wants to run the ball. People might look back when he was at Oregon and think about Marcus Mariota, who obviously the Titans, had, and think, oh, this guy wants to throw it all around. No, that's not the way he is. He wants to run the ball. It all starts with that. And obviously they have Ashton Genty. He's going to get carries. And they also signed Raheem Mostert, who still has juice. So this will be really, really interesting. They signed Geno Smith. He's a professional quarterback. Their wide receiver group's going to be interesting. They've got two draft choices that I find fascinating. Number one, I love Jack Beck's tape. I don't know what Jack Beck will do in the league, but I would say that size and style of play, he reminded me of Puka Nacua. Very physical, outstanding run after catch. And they also drafted the UT kid, Dante Thornton,
Yeah.
who at 6'5", whatever, 210, whatever he is, ran a 4.3. And I watched his tape. I think there's more to there. You obviously know him, being where you are. But I think there's more to there than just the fact that he can run fast. Now, I don't know if that's going to come out as a rookie, but I think there's more there.
Yeah, and that's always been the curiosity with him. He didn't necessarily realize it as a college player, as a transfer coming over to Tennessee, but certainly I'm sure that the coaching staff in Las Vegas and the front office also saw what you're seeing, Greg, that potential to be something more. Because frankly, I was surprised to see him go as early as the fourth round. He's
Well,
still got the
the
physical.
4.3 helped a little bit there, Buck. When a
Oh, for
guy at six
sure.
five runs a 4.3,
Yeah.
that's a little bit of an eye opener.
At that size, for sure, as you mentioned, anybody moving that fast, an
And
NFL
by the
team
way,
is going to take a
he
chance on
played
them.
that way on tape. I mean, 4.3. You and I, we don't know exactly what that means, other than it's really good.
Yeah.
But he was fast on tape. Sometimes you see a guy run fast at the combine, you put the tape on, and you go, God, he doesn't look like that at all on tape. He looked like that on tape.
So Pete Carroll comes in and he retains Patrick Graham, which I thought was
Yeah.
interesting. What do you like about what Patrick Graham's defense has done, Greg? Because I feel like that's because they've struggled, obviously, as far as wins as a franchise go in the last couple of years. I feel like the Raiders' defense may get overlooked by the general public.
Yeah, and I think Graham is just one of those really solid D coordinators. He's not necessarily super aggressive. I think he's more of a um, you know, fundamental guy as opposed to, we're going to pressure. The way I would probably describe it is he's more of an execution based defensive coordinator than a highly schemed based. Now, that doesn't mean there's not a lot of schemes. We know every coach has a lot of schemes, but he's not a guy that's just going to come after you. He expects quality execution. That's what it's all about, not so much pressure. They've got a lot of new pieces on defense. It's going to be interesting how quickly they can come together. Solid players like Landon Roberts. They signed Jermaine Pratt. They brought in Eric Stokes. It never quite worked out in Green Bay. He was a big time draft choice. Jeremy Chin has always been a really solid player. They drafted the kid from Iowa State, Darian Porter, the corner. We'll see if he starts. I mean, this is a kid that is another guy that has great speed, but does not have a ton of experience playing on the outside. And playing outside corner, you don't really want to be learning on the fly in the NFL. I mean, everybody has to learn, but I mean, he has very limited experience.
There's really not much from a schematic standpoint that's changed, hardly at all, with the Los Angeles Chargers. We know that Greg Roman and Jesse Minter are back. We know that Jim Harbaugh is still running the show. We know they want to run the football and be physical, Greg, on both sides of the ball. The personnel, though, they do have a fair amount of additions on defense more than anything. And the running game with Omarion Hampton as their first round
Yes.
pick and Najee Harris in free agency, that's a really interesting and potentially effective 1-2 punch.
Yeah, I love Amari Hampton. I mean, I thought his tape. Sometimes you watch a player and it's not an X and O point, Buck. It's just this guy looked like an NFL running back to me on tape. It'll be interesting to see because he's a better back than Najee Harris. So we'll see how that plays out. What's interesting though, their play action pass game is going to be fascinating because they drafted two guys. Well, first of all, they drafted Trey Harris. You're familiar with him being from the SEC out of Ole Miss. I kept going back and forth on him. he's a big kid. He did not run well, but yet on tape, it looks like he could be a vertical dimension. I'm just not sure. But the other kid they drafted, Keandre Lambert Smith, he was a fifth round pick out of Auburn. He was a transfer from Penn State. I really like this kid, and he can run. And they brought back Mike Williams, who unfortunately has not been able to stay healthy. We know about Lad McConkey. This offense has a chance to be a really, really good offense that can beat you both running the ball and throwing the ball. It's going to be really intriguing. They play the Chiefs week one in the Brazil game. That's a really interesting week one game.
Yeah, you just hope that everybody, gets through that one healthy after last year's Eagles Packers
Yeah,
game and
yeah.
the field conditions not being ideal. There's a player that they added this year, Greg, who I genuinely enjoy. He's been with the Jets, so maybe he hasn't been as noticeable, but like I think Tyler Conklin is such a fun ad for that offense in particular with Greg Roman and what he likes to do.
You know what? I'm glad you mentioned him because I always really liked him as a player. Um, and I think he's a really good receiver. They've got the blocking tight end. Will Disley is a really good blocking tight end, but Tyler Conklin, he's never been sort of featured as a receiver. He may not be here. I'm not suggesting he's going to catch 80 balls, but I agree with you, Buck. I always thought he was a really good football player.
We will do the NFC West when we get together next week. We are rolling right through the offseason, less than a month to go until training camp. Greg's going to be back in town to take in some Titans news and notes and see how things continue to develop, which we're looking forward to doing as we do each and every year. Buddy, I appreciate the time as always. Always good to chat.
Appreciate it, Buck. That was fun. Yep.